Hi everyone, Moonsettler is joining me today. I gave him a shout out on my last video. He used to watch my channel and he agreed to come on and explain some of this stuff on a deeper level than I'm capable of. So thanks so much for coming on the channel, man.
Hello, mechanic, and hello, guys.
Great. So I think what I really wanted to discuss with you was some high level Covenant stuff, and then on a deeper level, what it really looks like and some of the minutiae about how the different proposals compare, like CTV, APO, and this new TX hash and checksig from Stack. Does that sound like
Yeah,
something you want to get into?
yeah, great. Sounds great.
All right, cool. So let's start with covenants in general. What do you think of that initial notion that people had that covenants poses some kind of existential risk to Bitcoin, where malicious governments can make it so that all Bitcoins eventually end up locked inside these covenants?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to understand about that is it would be a really impractical to try to maintain black or white lists inside covenants or try to update them or anything like that. So I believe if someone wants to do malicious covenants, then something like disabling every output type for those coins forever that is not like taproot or something like that, or not legacy. Uh, you could do stuff like that with introspection kind of things, but again, to don't dump these coins on someone, it kind of presupposes that they are running a compatible wallet, because you can just send someone a coin that is locked up differently than how they are asking for it. When I give you an address, that address commits to the lock script that I want to use, and you can't just change that. You would send the coin somewhere else, and I would tell you to stuff it. I have not been paid. So my wallet, my rules, I decide how I'm getting paid. So I believe this whole idea has been a little overblown. And as for government coercion, like let's say they can actually force people at gunpoint to use a certain wallet, it still just doesn't really hit it, right? So it's impractical to do stuff like that. Much more likely they would force you into multi-sig with them or with some provider or financial service. And then you do not have this disintermediated authorization. Bitcoin loses that property for you. You are basically fully permissioned, and they can actually decide for you what transactions you can make and stuff like that, and they can deny certain transactions, like that you are trying to break free, or you are trying to buy something they don't approve, or you are not disclosing financial and personal information of the recipient properly, or whatever. So they can have about as much control as they have in the banking system. And the easiest, best way to do this really is like using something like Taproot Music, which looks like a single signature.
Mm-hmm.
It does not actually add extra requirements or anything special. It does not even detect, is not even detectable on chain, and it would be not possible to break it with a hard fork. So basically, if a malicious government wants to hold your hand to the degree, then they would probably use multisig or music, and not covenants like that. Covenants basically take away from you the possibility to make certain changes in the future, and that is important for minimizing trust in certain cooperative games and transactions that you can play. So they are self-imposed restrictions, and I don't think the control freaks actually want to limit the things that they can do in the future. They may want to limit what you can do, but they don't want to limit themselves to anything predefined. These black and white lists are constantly updated. The rules change. So overall, I think the concerns are completely unfounded. If I really just look at it, considering everything, then then it's just impractical for them. Like it would be hard for us to come up with a covenant that is actually useful for a government as opposed to like two of two music.
Yeah, it seems that Musig basically is already posing the exact same threat. And are you saying it would actually be a more practical way for governments
Yeah,
to, right? So,
absolutely. It would be cheaper and they would have more control. And some people argued before that it's actually a good thing. They don't want a situation where you could only be set free with a hard fork. Like some people thought about covenants like that you would have to hard fork Bitcoin to break these covenants if people were coerced into that. But think about what it would mean to try to free people from a music. It would mean we have to break taproot. Like how does that? So it's even worse, really. It gives them more control. It is cheaper, more efficient. They can do everything they want. We can't even break it with a hard fork, even if we could coordinate such a thing. So I think people should like take the chill pill about this line of thought, basically.
yeah, I understand. Thanks for addressing that because that was basically everyone's initial concern. Um, would you say there's a qualitative difference between what I was referring to in my last video as open-ended covenants versus closed-end? Because CTV
Yeah.
has to define a way in which you eventually make the coins free again, whereas you can have more general covenants that don't. Or is there really like a black and white difference, or is this usually up for a debate with any covenants proposal,
Yeah.
just how open it
So
is?
yeah. So basically, I don't think that is a huge difference. Like there are instances where it is more practical to have some recursion and the covenants that can go indefinitely. There are instances like that where it makes people's lives easier because they don't have to generate like a million transaction templates ahead and store and agree and distribute them, right? So if you want to do something like blind merge mining or something like that, and you have a recursive covenant that has to spend the exact amount to itself, but you can add another input, and thus you can do this sidechain block hash linking and fee bidding atomically each time, and you have this recursive script that spans to itself, then everyone just needs to know that address and that script, and they can use it, and you don't need to like generate 100 million of these hashes beforehand. But it's not as bad as people think, because if you want to do the same with CTV, let's say, of course it is going to end at one point, but like I said, let's say you put that into the future, say it will be like 100 million blocks from now, and you can define the exit output. So you have consensus on an exit output, and from that, actually deterministically, you can generate all the scripts backwards. So you don't even need to give people 100 million have created transactions or transaction templates or anything like that, and people don't even need to store, because everyone can generate the entire chain deterministically from that last output. And basically that that means if you really want to, like, you really don't want people to lose this, you might as well inscribe on the funding transaction, you can inscribe that last output, and then basically anyone could sync up from the blockchain and could generate the entire chain. So that's why I'm saying there is no real practical difference within our lifetime, or in the time frame that we think about these things with our limited human lifespans, in this sense, because forever or 1,000 years is the same for you, right? So you can't make a meaningful distinction between forever and 1,000 years to your self sovereignty or anything like that. And it can be practical. So certain cases it's just simpler and more practical to have some limited recursion. But people usually want to avoid with that is or at least there is some debate around hash rate escrows. We can get into this later. And if you can implement some counter that acts like these hash rate escrows in some circumvent way, that might actually be controversial, right? So that is kind of more like where people are thinking about this, that maybe I don't want hash rate escrows implemented in such a roundabout way, instead of this whole debate around, can a covenant run forever, or it has to terminate after 1,000 years or 1,000,000 years. So yeah, that's how I think about it.
Got it. Thank you. So, getting into the specifics of the different proposals, let's start with APO. What's your? Can you give a brief explanation of what APO is and what it does?
All right. So normally, when you are selecting from the Zcash types available, when you create a signature, you are kind of telling Bitcoin and the nodes that would be validating your transaction how to hash, which parts to omit from the transaction when it hashes the transaction. So the Zcash flag tells the script engine how to construct the transaction preimage that is going to be hashed. And APO is trying to extend the available Zcash types, and I don't actually know like all the possible combinations, but there are some interesting things that you can do already with Bitcoin. So for example, you can sign the Zcash all is very simple. That will sign all inputs and all outputs. That kind of means that a transaction, a transaction that only has SegWit inputs is basically non-malleable. So once you sign it, people can't really change its transaction ID, because the way the transaction ID is determined is it is again hashed differently. So in theory, if you could alter some parts of the transaction because they are not hashed for the signature, then the transaction could be altered in a way that your signature is still valid.
This is a selective malleability, I guess.
Yes, this is the malleability. Yes. And basically, by removing the signatures from that space that is getting hashed and putting it into an extension block space, SegWit kind of eliminated this problem. So we can now sign transactions and know that their transaction ID cannot be malleated. But it's kind of only true if you sign them with Zcash all. Because if I sign it with Zcash single, that means I'm only signing like one input and the corresponding output. And and that means someone else can add another fee input, let's say, and they can add the change output even if they want to. And they can then sign with Zcash all, and then the transaction is kind of non-malleable, but I could not predict the transaction ID. And this can be very useful. So there are times when you want to give someone authorization to make a transaction with coins that you control, but you don't know what the future fee market will be. And you want to give them the ability to adapt to that future fee market, to add their own fees and add their own chain.
Well, this would be really useful for creating a Lightning channel. You want to be able to force close the channel with a higher fee if you like.
Yeah, but with Lightning is kind of allergic to transaction ID malleability, but there might be cases where this is okay. But yes, there are places that you can use this, but they can complicate stuff. So it really depends on where you can use it. One thing where I found it very useful is I have been tinkering with this idea. We can get into it a little bit later, this credit cash idea. And this would be basically, you would enter into a 2 of 2 escrow with someone, but before you enter into that 2 of 2 escrow, you want an escape hatch, you want an exit to an arbitration contract. So both of you would sign that transaction with this 2 of 2. But again, you don't know when this will be submitted. You literally don't know when this will need to be submitted, maybe it will be 5 years from now, and the fees will be completely different.
Yeah.
So you are going to sign if it's Zcash single, and that means those coins have to go to that exact contract, but you are not actually setting the transaction ID in stone, and inputs can be added to it. So it's very convenient there. So there are examples where we are not using Zcash, but most people in most wallets are actually using Zcash. That's like the standard, because you don't really want someone else to be able to mess with your transaction ID and makes it harder for your wallet to track and find these things and stuff like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot
of sense. APO,
yeah, go for it.
Yes. APO is trying to introduce new Zcash flags, but these don't necessarily make sense in all cases, right? So for example, as far as I can tell, this would be like limited to the script part in Taproot, and some new version would be introduced. I'm a bit fuzzy on those details, but the point is, you want to add, the whole thing started out, it was called Zcash no input. Mm-hmm. So the problem, like I described, is I did not describe that. Sorry, I did not tell you. So the problem, if you want to create a chain of transactions where you have some flexibility on the inputs, if you sign one and then the transaction ID of it gets altered in a way that you did not predict, then the next consecutive transaction, if it references that input previous out point, let's call it previous out point, right? The input transaction ID and index, output index is what we are calling out point. And the previous transaction out point, if it's not predictable, then your signature is not going to be worth anything if you commit to the inputs. And so people figured out that in some cases you only want to put a restriction on the log script in a way that only a certain output distribution is possible. So you only want to sign the outputs. And they called it Zcash no input. Mm-hmm. So APO's ancestor was called Zcash no input because you only sign the outputs. Mm-hmm. And this solved the whole problem with the transaction ID malleability. And certain use cases were already possible with that. But when they started thinking about L2 or later Christian to LN symmetry, Lightning symmetry, mm-hmm. When they started thinking about what they need actually there, then APO started to take a different, more specialized and more special case form. And that's kind of how it became. And 1 second. So it has some limited recursion because you can use it in such a way that you have to basically spend it to the same script. And that is why any priv-out, the point is, I think it has like 3 modes of operations, 3 main modes, or maybe 3 flags and 9 modes of operations. So it gets pretty complex. It has a table. It's not in front of me, but the point is you are using new Zcash types to commit to different parts of the transaction. Mm-hmm. And someone pointed out that if you use any prev-out, any script, I think that is the 2 flags. Any prev-out, any script, then you get something very similar to check template verify. Basically, you can emulate check template verify to a degree, but as it turned out, you can't emulate it closely enough. For example, if you want to implement ARC, we can talk about the anchor time lock transaction that Burak invented. If you want to implement ARC, then you cannot actually use APO as it was defined in the Bitcoin improvement proposal.
Sure. So let's round up before we get to ARC, because that's obviously a really interesting thing I want to discuss. So let's round up what we're talking about with APO, because there's maybe 2 more points to make on it. So how does it specifically relate to cleaning up Lightning, where you no longer need to maintain a consistent database of all the previous channel states, and as such you can scale Lightning by like an order of magnitude or something. It's like a complete. It's an absolute home
Yeah,
run for Lightning
people are
scaling.
talking about this in ways that does not really make sense necessarily.
Hmm.
So yes, so with LN symmetry, what you get basically is that you only need to hold the newest state. So
Hmm.
the newest commitment transactions are the only things that you need to hold on to.
What happens if
That
someone
give,
tries to close in an old state in APO land?
yeah. So if someone tries to close with an old state before APO or with normal N channels, then they can be penalized. So it's
Hmm.
very dangerous to try to restart a Lightning node that failed for some reason, experience the crash, and you are restoring from backup. You are risking losing your coins to your channel peers, and that's really a very, very risky proposition. So what people can do with Lightning is restore static channel backups, and then your node will basically beg your channel peers to close on you, to force close on you.
Yes.
And assuming that they have the latest state,
Yeah, and
they do not.
the general assumption is that they won't close in an
Yeah.
old state because you could be trying to trick them, because you
Yes.
secretly
Yes.
do have the latest state, and then you can justice them.
Yes. Or you can use watchtowers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yes. So you are kind of in their hands, but their game theory tilts towards being honest because they can lose a lot. So
For sure.
when you have LN symmetry, that there is no penalty in the default operation. It's basically symmetrical. You can always just spend in the timeout period. You can always just spend with a newer state, and that basically means that you do not have as much risk about trying to resume a Lightning channel. For example, if you experience some failure and you are asking you are restoring from a static backup or some previous state, and you are asking your channel peer, and it looks good. So the state they give you looks good enough to you, and you want to continue and you want to adopt. They can trick you into like closing with an invalid state and take everything from you. All they can do is like override that with the last state that you actually signed, and that gives you like more safety basically, because you can't be, even if you are no malicious and your machine just made a mistake, or there was an error, or some glitch or whatever, you can't be taken to the shed, so to speak, and shot and taken
Yeah.
from you. So some people really like this property of LN symmetry, that it just that risks a lot of this thing. But I think the part about how it would allow Lightning scale, I think that's overstated. Like, yeah, sure, kind of we know that Lightning is absolutely trending towards a more centralized topology, and the more LSP-based experience, even for the people who hold their own channels. And it's not likely that it would be an impossible burden for professionals, specialists, to hold these states. But the other big thing that happened is splicing. And when you splice, you basically replace your transactions on chain. So you are doing an on-chain operation, and you are getting a new UTXO. And there is a very clever way to do this, but the point is that once this is settled, once you have the new UTXO committed, all the previous state can be safely discarded. All the commitment transactions that were trying to spend the old state can no longer be done on Bitcoin, because you can only spend the UTXO once. So all of that is garbage. And basically rebalancing these professionals, when they rebalance these channels and do splicings and splice outs to let people pay from Lightning to on-chain or on-chain to Lightning. They can do these pay joins with these taproot channels in the future. So we kind of have an idea of where this is going. And when you are doing that, you get a free pruning of your state anyhow, and you are going to need to do those to manage your liquidity.
That's a
So
very
I
good
kind
point.
of
So we are mitigating some of some of the benefits of APO or anything else that allows LN symmetry with splicing?
Yeah, so I think the big thing that remains is that it de-risks your operation to a degree, right? So you cannot be tricked, or you cannot broadcast an invalid
there are
state
many
out of some
circumstances. There are many circumstances in which you can get justiced even without any sort of malicious behavior. It's just an accident.
Yeah.
So the de-risking is an important part of it that I hadn't thought of. And the scaling aspect of it, you're saying, is a little overblown, and it's made at least somewhat redundant by the introduction of splicing.
Yes, I believe in a future where like on-chain space is going to be very precious and expensive and highly coveted, and Lightning channel maintenance will be done by professionals who are going to do this fairly actively, because there is only so much you can shift around with these circular rebalances and whatnot. So you can't really fix a more serious imbalance in the graph. Everyone is just going to better their own situation by making someone else's worse. If everyone just tries to do that possibly. So eventually you are going to need to rebalance these channels, because if you have like persistent flows, customers to merchants and typical stuff like that, then you are going to have to. And when you do that, you are going to get a free pruning of the state. And yes, so I kind of believe it makes things easier. I think Rusty said that it would just really make his job specifically so much easier. It would make the whole thing a lot less risky and simple, and that's a good thing. But it would not give a direct benefit to the users of Lightning, in the sense that there is professionals who do this as a business and are completely equipped and handling this thing completely differently than home users, and they have the infrastructure to handle this anyhow, so they can run redundant storages and they can run their own watchtower. So the people that actually benefit this is almost like the Lightning developers, and that's a bit funny, right? But the risking is important, I believe. So I still think that there is a so overall, it's not a bad thing. I'm a fan of LN symmetry. I just think it's important is overstated a bit.
That's really good to point out, and I would really just emphasize the point you're making about how elegant splicing is and how much of a practical benefit to everyone that provides, and it covers multiple parts of what it improves multiple areas within Lightning user experience.
Yes.
So. There's one more point on APO, is that this benefit, LN symmetry, that it provides, some people have commented that it's kind of a hacky way to do it, and it would be preferable to do it in another way if we're going to do it at all, and it would require CTV plus check sig from stack or something else. Could you comment on that?
Yeah. So I as well tweeted it a few times that CTV plus check sig from stack is a better APO than APO. But there is of course a slight penalty there, because of the way check template verify works. Is you actually have to have the template hash somewhere in your witness. So it either in case of coupled with check sig from stack, it either has to come from the witness stack as parameter, or it has to be in other ways. It has to be in the script, in the witness script. Again, we are using mostly SegWit nowadays, so it's going to be in the witness script, and basically it is going to be in the SegWit block space somewhere, that transaction template. And it has been pointed out that this might not be necessary. So when you are using it with check sig from stack, it might actually be worth to decouple the operations that CTV is doing, because CTV is a very highly specialized and optimized opcode that is taking this parameter that is basically a hash of the transaction from the stack. It creates this SIG hash-like commitment of the transaction, taking a hash of the transaction image in a certain way. it compares the two things and runs an equal verify on them. So you could probably decompose it if you remove the equal verify part, and because there's like one more byte. If you are talking about Bitcoin script, you could just simply like ask the opcode to put this hash on the stack. So Bitcoin script is executed on a stack machine, and if you have the template on the stack that you want to commit to, and you have an opcode that puts the hash on the stack, then you can compare equal verify these two with one more opcode, and so this can be decomposed pretty safely. It does not change the meaning and the use of CTV unless it is combined with check-sig from stack, maybe.
So,
because
would anyone argue for the use of check? Sorry, please finish your point first, and I'll ask you.
All right. So check-sig from stack is basically it is live on Liquid right now. Mm-hmm. It is used in Bcash, Bitcoin Cash. They call it check.sig, I believe. That's what they call it. So it has been running on these chains. It causes no problem. It does nothing else, but you put a message and the signature on the stack, and this is going to verify the signature for that message. And when you combine it with something like check template verify, it becomes very powerful, because now you can determine an output distribution. You can sign that. The Bitcoin script can verify that yes, this template is valid for that signature. You do not have to specify basically all the possible ways a transaction can be spent, a transaction output can be spent when you are funding it. So with normal CTV, you have to specify everything. With if you combine it with this check-sig from stack, you can actually sign this template. So you can agree on an alternative distribution.
It's kind of a covenant within a covenant, which frees up CTV to be, much more flexible. Or no, I'm not describing it right. Yeah.
No. The way I like to say is it is deferred authorization. And in a way, right, because hash locks are also deferred authorizations, if you think about it, but you would not commit to a certain output distribution. So when you combine this output hash check with this signature, you can actually just decide you can authorize someone to spend this, but only in a certain way. And that is important. And also this whole thing is totally not subject to malleability. So it doesn't matter what is the input transaction ID, the input previous out point. It doesn't matter how it looks like, because it will just demand that you need to provide this message that is signed with this public key. And that message needs to be a hash that describes the transaction output. And this is kind of like a much more flexible way, if you combine these two things, a much more flexible way to sign transactions. And especially, like I said, these deferred authorizations are very good because they are non-malleable, and they open up a lot of new use cases where, like, non-interactive channels and stuff like that, where you really don't have to negotiate stuff. You can prove to someone, you can prove to them that they are allowed to spend the coins unilaterally with your permission. They have everything, and they can only do it in a certain way. You can set up these situations, and you don't have to predefine everything like half a year ahead or whatever time ahead. And you don't need to use like time locks and alternative stuff, right? And you can prove it out to the other party that you cannot actually walk back on that authorization. So, and they cannot use that authorization to spend your coins in a way that you did not intend it to. So not sure if I'm rambling or I'm explaining it clearly what this is supposed to be.
No, I appreciate the I
Yeah.
appreciate all the
So
elaboration you're
so
doing.
one thing that with CTV, like I said, you have to put this template hash on the witness stack or in a witness parameter, and with if you decompose CTV, if you are just taking this template hash and put it on the stack when executing the script, right? So this is not a parameter. This is not something that has to be in the script. You are just generating this hash, and then you are only providing the signature. This signature will only be valid for that message, for that exact message. So if someone tries to change the outputs, one of the outputs, he tries to change the output distribution, with your signature will not match that message, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is why you can omit the template, so it's even more efficient. And that is one reason why we would maybe like to decompose check template verify of CTV. We might want to decompose, because if we combine it with checksig from stack, we gain efficiency. Basically, it just makes sense. Like literally, there is no reason to include that data, because you can't alter it anyhow, and it's available. The script can compute it. So that's kind of the thinking behind that new proposal, and also tries to like bring together the strengths of check template verify and APO without the specific quirks. I don't know how they quirks pronounce it. So without the weirdness of APO, because APO has some weird modes of operation that are hard to reason about and hard to justify. And that is why Reardon Code was trying to create this proposal, which is not even a real BIP so far. So he
You mean
mostly
TX
made
hash?
it for.
You mean the TX
Yes.
hash? Yep.
I don't know what's the current name. It is op template hash maybe now. The current name is op template hash, because
Right.
these things floated around for years, and people mean this depending on when they heard about it. They associate to different things, because optx hash
Yeah,
was
I know.
supposed to
Like
be.
no input changed its name to any prevout, right? And people were calling things by different names.
Yeah. So to avoid confusion, yes. So I'm not exactly sure what the current name is, but this in this particular proposal, we are not trying to allow the one that specifies this hashing method. We don't try to give them so much freedom that they get like 32 bits, and they can use any combination of those bits to hash the transaction in various ways, and open up a lot of unintended consequences. Instead, we are trying to just take very specific, well reasoned about, well understood ways to hash for now, and just provide a single opcode to get that hash on stack, and can be used either with, like I said, either with equal verify. So either you use it with equal verify in a CTV, like where you don't need a signature, so it's like 1 byte less efficient than CTV, maybe, not even sure, because CTV I think needed an op drop if you wanted to combine it with other stuff, because it wanted to upgrade OpNob 4, and OpNob 4 would have left the template on the stack. And CTV, to be a soft fork and be compatible with all clients, would have to leave the hash on the stack, and then you would have to drop it. Or if you were done, it's a very weird quirk, again, a weird behavior to me. It's not so intuitive that Bitcoin script will evaluate some random junk left on the stack as true. So basically, if there is something left on the stack, even if it's a template, it will cast it to bool as true. And basically, if you did not want to continue the script, if you did not want to add additional spend conditions, then just doing CTV would work without op drop and like adding an op true or something like that. If you want it to be really neat, then you would use an op drop op true, and then it would be very clear that you intended to finish with a true statement. But kind of not necessary. So you can save 2 bytes on that in that case, because the script engine will just take that as a true. And in case of again, if you combine this with check sick from stack, then it will consume that message. So we expect check sick from stack to consume the parameters it gets. And so that's kind of the rambly way to get into the differences of these things. The one important thing I would like to get into is why some people are so very excited about check template verify.
Yeah, I would love to go there as well. But I would also like to zoom out a bit, because this is very, very deep stuff. I'm having a hard time following you. I'm getting some of it, but I do understand how stacks work and the various opcodes and the way in which they're executed. But I still have trouble understanding some fundamental stuff here. So, like, you have the masked structure in Taproot anyway, and you're able to specify all these spending conditions via leveraging just having a script hash in the first place.
Yes.
So it does, on a much higher level than all this, it does confuse me, the very notion that you can't do all this with what we already have. Why is something like CTV even necessary? Why can't you define an output? Why can't you predefine an output for within just a regular old script that we have right now? Is it just inefficient, or it's just not possible?
Yeah, it's possible to a degree. It's very, very good observation, because with Must you can have like 1,000 different distributions that all commits to a different output distribution between two people, for example. So you can do that with Taproot Must. The problem is each level in the Taproot Must tree is going to take, I believe, 64 bytes. So it is a logarithmic binary tree, and each level is going to take 64 bytes. So it's not super efficient to have like 1,000. If you have 1,000 outcomes, that's going to be like a 10 deep tree, I believe, from the top of my head. That's a 10 deep tree. So that's 640 bytes that you are just spending on to get to your leaf. Right.
Yep.
Taproot has these weird inefficiencies because, of course, you are compressing like a huge script. If you are trying to do this with if then else, then it could be huge. But with CTV specifically, actually, if then else would be more compact. So that's a funny thing. So you don't actually necessarily gain anything there. So that it really depends on how complex are your leaves, if you even want to do that. And
so what does CTV do specifically then? Is it entirely related to pre-commitment to certain outputs? And is that's literally the entire scope of the thing? Is there anything else?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So as I pointed out on Twitter a few days ago, I was saying, this really isn't such a frightening proposal when you get down to it, because everything that we've seen about it, Jeremy Rubin's conversation with Stefan Lavara and all the analysis we've seen, I was always scratching my head wondering what fundamentally is this thing actually doing. And it is just that simple at the end of the day, and it's not so different from what we have. So you could be equally scared by saying, we have lock time, right? So you can, if you want, you can create a Bitcoin address, which is a hash of a script that prevents you from spending any coins sent there for, 1,000 blocks or 1,000,000 blocks or whatever. And if that scares you, it shouldn't, because it really doesn't matter. If you don't want that, you just don't generate an address that is that script. So it's with CTV, it's the same thing. If you don't want to limit what outputs, where you can spend the coins once you receive them, then just don't create a script that does that, and you're fine. And if the likelihood of coercion into being forced to do this is it's the $5 wrench attack thing again. Like, why would anyone use such a sophisticated method to enslave you when they can just hit you over the head, right?
Right. Excellent point. So what I would like to get into it a little bit later, is that there is some nuance to this, and there are differences that make a big difference in the grand scheme of things between what you actually commit to. But you are absolutely correct that in its essence, what CTV aims to do is to get the absolute minimum set from a transaction, from the absolute minimum set that makes it useful in this context for these use cases. So it is trying to be very reasonable, as in very easy to reason about, very easy to determine what it can do, very easy to test, and very minimal and very efficient. So CTV is implemented in a way where if it's overused, it actually speeds up block validation. It's so efficient, right? So it literally cannot have any negative impacts on.
So supposing we used it now, would it make something we're currently doing redundant because it would be a more efficient way of doing it?
Possibly a lot of things, but I just wanted to mention like one thing before we get into what you can use it for. Is that so mainly what you want to use covenants for is you limit yourself, and you probably limit yourself. Basically, that's the essence of covenants, that you enter into a contract that you cannot break. That's the whole thing, and you can prove it to someone that you entered into a contract that you cannot break.
Yeah, this is the same. In essence, this is the same as multisig, where you've created a condition that says I can't spend my own coins unless another private key signs the transaction, and it's just as provable.
Yes, but you are very easily trapped into such a thing. So that is why we are suffering from time outs and time locks and alternative spend pots, and then you have to keep refreshing these things and stuff like that, because you can get trapped into such a construct where you are at someone else's good, you are reliant on someone's good graces, and you are exposed to their interaction, or they still have to trust you, or you have to deal with these time locks. So some stuff is already possible in a very, very roundabout way, and often enough you either need interaction to set these up. So you have to make people who want to use this interact to a great degree in beforehand. This can be funded, because you have to cooperatively sign the transactions that will get you out if the other party stops responding, right? So and they can be limited in their lifespan, because you don't want to enter into a contract where you can't get out. So the way CTV works is you can make this whole thing a lot less interactive in a lot of cases. So you can predefine these things from your end, and then you can prove it to someone else that you cannot break this contract. If it gets funded, you cannot break this contract. And if you are trying to do this with pre-signed transactions, then you have these transaction malleability issues, and or alternatively you have like these inflexible fee schedule. You have to figure out the fees beforehand, and that just makes everything more difficult. And your state can blow up exponentially, and if anyone loses any of those transactions that have been pre-signed, so the whole backup thing on that is a lot more sketchy and vulnerable to loss and stuff like that. So covenants really improve this. They don't necessarily. So probably we could come up in very inconvenient, inefficient, and roundabout ways with the same behavior with pre-signed transactions to a great degree. But covenant just make the whole thing safer and simpler and easier to reason about, really. So we are limiting transactions in how they can be spent for a purpose. So we are not doing this for fun. We actually want a behavior. We actually want a smart contract out of this. And we actually want people to not get trapped in these. And they for them to be able to verify that they won't get trapped. We want to prove it to them that they will be able to exit. So these things are all important. And if you if you and your peer or peers, because it can be multiple people, use the same wallet, then just from certain things like public keys, you all have a public key or like an XPub or something like that, and knowing these agreed upon structures. So the wallet has a specific way if you construct these scripts and contracts, and if you know the keys and you know that template that is going to be used to construct the whole thing, from this minimal backup, you can actually reconstruct the whole stuff. Nobody needs to store these pre-signed transactions, right? They don't need to.
So you can have. I might be misunderstanding you here, but you're talking about a wallet that would construct an XPub from starting from a covenant.
Sorry, no. Sorry, I meant the actual transactions can be constructed from very minimal information, and that minimal information can have a much better backup properties than if you have some hot wallets that are interacting with each other and they lose this state. Then you are in a big trouble. If you lose these pre-signed transactions, that you are in a huge trouble. But these are not static backupable, and you want people to be able to punch their seed to steel plates. Yeah. You want them to be able to reason about their security in such a way, right?
Yeah.
And their backups, because that has evolved because we have seen what dangers does it have to just have a wallet.file on your computer and stuff like that. People lost a lot of Bitcoin in these things, and the covenants help you to have better backup schemes and have these things reconstructable, non-interactively even. So if you think about 5 people,
is this high level? Is this to reconstruct script conditions rather than just reconstruct an address list from an XPub?
You reconstruct the scripts. Yes, that's what I call contract. And when I say contract, you can think about scripts or consecutive scripts, and you can reconstruct the scripts from very minimal static backups, and then you can actually create the transactions that will walk through them without the interaction of the other parties that
so yeah, this is essentially just to keep it as simple as I possibly can. This is essentially because you need more than private keys at this point to be able to spend stuff. You need to know what the script conditions are. Is that right?
Yeah. So what I'm trying to get at is if you try to emulate this with pre-signed transactions that are possible today, you are exposing yourself to a world of hurt. It really just makes the whole thing unreasonably complex and dangerous. That's what I'm trying to get at. That covenants de-risk the whole thing for you. It just makes it a better user experience. It allows you to have better backup schemes that are simpler and easier to verify and are more robust because they are more static in nature, right? So that's what I'm trying to get at, that if you have pre-signed transactions that you have to back up or you can lose your Bitcoin on certain spend pots, and you have an exponential blow up of state because you have these huge taproot masts that are coming one after the other, and you somehow manage to calculate like all the possible ways to do this, and you have 5 gigabytes of pre-signed transactions that you cannot lose a single byte of. That is not a good backup experience compared to just punching seed words to a steel plate.
Yeah, for sure.
And knowing which wallet you used with people, right? So you can think of covenants as something that can help us a great deal because they really remove the necessity for these transactions. And that is why people say APO is weird, because APO still technically works by having a transaction, having a signature. So APO has this weird property that it is using the SIG hash mechanism and some bullshit signature, it really is not necessary, because what you actually want to do is you want to compare a transaction to a certain hash. That is at the essence of what you want to do. You want to pre-commit to either pre-commit, or you want to defer a later authorization to a specific output set hash. That's kind of what covenants try to do. right now, because there are other types of covenant. If you want, we can talk about introspection, like a low-level introspection and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to do here is to make all this accessible as I can, because there's a massive gap here between what technical people like yourself understand and what your normies understand. And I'm basically a normie. Like, I have a little bit more understanding, but I'm trying to bridge the gap here because there's a real hunger for this knowledge, and I wish it was out there, but it's very hard to keep track of. So I think
let's try to unpack it slowly.
Yeah, for sure. So one thing that stuck out for me that you were saying there is the idea that you would need you wouldn't just need the backup that CTV permits or Covenants in general permits, the simplified way in which you don't need to like know the entire mast structure or something if you weren't using Covenants. Is the fact that you refer to needing the same wallet as well, and that puts us that kind of puts us in this in this situation where people come to me with backups from years ago and I don't understand what wallet they used, so the backup becomes meaningless. So would we be at risk of that, or would we not make that same mistake again?
So that's a very good point. And by the way, if you look at the dark pool gist that I showed earlier, I actually did think about like how could someone recover if they like lost their computer and lost their home and are trying to recover from a static backup. What would be the minimum set of information in that case? So dark pool is basically a shared UTXO shared ownership cooperative scheme, and inside it uses eCache like privacy. So it is basically a full coin join that means you kind of can't link the various fungible amount virtual UTXOs to their previous state. Absolutely can't link them, and that gives you pretty good privacy. And it does not actually suffer from any weakness on the front that you would have an offline risk with this. So you can actually lose your computer, you can lose your home if you have your static backup, which is your seed phrase basically. The public keys that are participating in this, although you could probably get that from others, but if you have that, then that helps recover. And there is this. I just assume every wallet is going to end up with like a descriptor file, something that just describes the structure of the wallet, and you have to have the descriptor file that has the parameters for how these scripts are constructed, because there can be parameters that are tweaked. Like one pool can use different parameters than the other, but you are going to have a file that describes how these contracts are constructed, how this whole thing comes together, and how it can be deterministically
regenerated,
reconstructed. Yes. And in case of dark pool, you don't really need to actually back up the public key set if you don't want to resume the cooperation with others, and they can just tell you can very easily check out. So if you take a look at the on-chain state, they give you a list of pub keys, and you have your template, your own static template backup, and your own key. You can use these informations to regenerate the whole state and check it, compare it with what you see on chain, and then you have not been duped, right?
Yeah.
And basically, what it boils down to is you of course have to have your static backup, but that does not change. So just because the state changed like 10,000 times, that one thing does not change. That is a static backup.
Yeah, of course.
And your key is also a static backup. Your seed that generates your private keys is also a static backup.
Yeah, and this is not too much of an expansion in scope from current backups. Like two static backups instead of one is not ridiculous, and it's basically the model we need to move to anyway, because people are just
one part is not even private. So the good thing is the template, you can upload it into cloud.
Right, so this is
literally,
this is actually better than the current problem with reconstructing wallets, right? Where you don't know the derivation path and you have the seed, but you can't figure out how it was made exactly. Like, this is better than that because the information about that is actually public. Whereas, if you're trying to reconstruct from an HD wallet, with just a seed phrase, the derivation path of that wallet is not public. So actually, there's more guesswork involved.
Yeah, and if you actually have like the usual backups that you get from these, usually contain XPubs, which are privacy sensitive. So if you upload that to cloud, then Google will know your coins.
Yeah, of course.
And so if you unencrypted upload these things into various cloud services and other places, then you basically just gave away what coins you own and what transactions you do directly to the NSA, right? So the point is that these descriptor files don't necessarily need to be toxic, but you do need, you still need to back up your secrets, and that usually means you have to back up a seed because you can deterministically generate all your secrets from that seed. And the whole dark pool protocol has been constructed in such a way that from these you can recover your coins even if the others don't cooperate with you. You just have to assume that they will not want to lock up their coins forever, and they will eject you if you don't cooperate. So basically you get into a plane crash and you are stranded in the middle of the ocean on an island for 3 months, and then you get rescued. And your virtual UTXOs have been ejected to on-chain because others actually want to transact in the pool. From your static backup and from your seed backup, which you would have anyhow, you can actually find these virtual UTXOs and you can actually pick them up. And maybe the pool even let you rejoin if you tell them what happened to you, and they say, oh yeah, so you did not try to inconvenience us, you were in genuine trouble or whatever. So basically you can do these things that don't seem to be as painful and weak as some of these hot wallet schemes. Like I said, even with Lightning, you are at someone else's graces, kind of.
Well, Lightning, you need a dynamic backup, which is just it's just another world of hurt, basically.
Yeah. So covenants in general, and from a bird's eye view, they would really help with these things. They would probably make Lightning better too in this sense. And Darkpool has this little weird thing where when you create a new state, it will kind of have a little inscription in it. So when you actually push to unilateral distribution of the funds because cooperation breaks down, so it gets distributed, then on-chain that inscription becomes visible. And that is how your wallet, by the way, will find your virtual UTXOs and how it will be able to determine what private keys and public keys you need to generate to find them. So it really helps speeding up the scans for your virtual UTXO. So you do not have to actually try every possible index. That's just a little interesting thing that you can actually make this like very, very, very user friendly and towards.
This is great. It sounds. I think it's worth explaining what Darkpool is, though, because So do you want to just go into that, and where it's at?
So that's an interesting thing because coin pools have been theorized about for a long time, and nobody was particularly excited about them because they saw that the interactivity is just too much. So it is unreasonable to expect 15 or 100 people to be online all the time. And if not everyone is online, then ejecting the non-cooperative parties is kind of painful and expensive. So that is why covenant pools were not really all the rage, and people were not hyper excited about them. And then you have these issues with various coin join schemes where the privacy is not as good as it could be. You have a lot of weaknesses and you leave a lot of on-chain trace, And basically as other people screw up and they lose their privacy, so decreases the unknown set of those people that did not screw up in a coin join, and it is there forever and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so the idea came that, okay, let's take coin pools. CTV makes a form of coin pools possible, and let's not tell each participant how much coins we have. Let's make it more eCash-like. Let's have fungible VTX amounts inside the pool, because these will be for savings. So my first idea was that this will be combined with eCash means, where eCash means are your pocket money, the amount of money that you would carry in your pocket on the street, and you can get mugged and you can lose it. But you have like a ultra high velocity money that is very cheap to use. It's integrated with the Lightning Network. And then you have your life savings, where you don't need to move that all that fast or that quickly or that often. You would cooperate with others to save on on-chain fees, and then you would have a lot of privacy, so people could use it as to retain privacy, to hide in a crowd, and to save on fees. And if you have a coordinator, if you have a central coordinator that is not trusted because he cannot steal coins, nobody would sign to a new state where they lose coins. So it is not a custodian, but he helps a lot to coordinate these operations. And if you could use on the leaves of these covenant distribution trees, if you could use predefined contracts with this coordinator where you are in like a 2 of 2 with him for like a time lock. And Arc does, by the way, exactly the same thing. We will get there, but it's
it sounds like we're about to start talking about Arc. To be honest, this is
we will start talking about that. It was a convergent evolution thing, kind of, because I did not actually know about Arc when I started talking about people in direct messages about this stuff, and it was more of a vague idea and a collection of pieces. It was not really something that I wrote down in full. What happened is that when I saw Burak talk about Arc, I was like, damn, man, this is very similar to what I had in mind and what I was working on that, and it encouraged me. So what he presented was really just an idea, and people were super excited, and it encouraged me to write down my own version of it, and to let people know. It kind of gave me courage to come forward with this thing. And they are very similar, and they are markedly different enough to be a different thing. But the idea that someone can provide liquidity for you to exit quickly, if cooperation breaks down, you do not have to be exposed to pain, and you do not have to take a lot of on-chain expense if there is someone that is not trusted but there to help. He is a service provider. He makes it his business to provide a service, and he can get you out of chain. That is a very interesting thing, that Bitcoin's contractual capabilities are very, very simple, but they allow for a lot of stuff. And the covenants and checkswitch from Stack really unlock that. Like, they really make it very convenient, because you do not have to predefine so much stuff. You do not have to think ahead so much. You can just give these deferred authorizations, because you don't know actually what kind of HTSs you want to pay, or what you want to do.
Hello? Oh dear.
Or be online at the same time, when you have to pay a Lightning invoice.
Can you hear me all right?
Something like that.
Can you hear me
it's
all
very
right?
good. Yeah.
Okay. You broke up for like 20 seconds there. So, it might be worth repeating.
That's bad, because I was talking.
Yeah.
All right. So what I try to say is that when you have someone that is not a trusted party, and but is there to help you, a service provider, right? So you have a coordinator, a service provider there, and this was kind of like a big shift in the coin pools, where coin pools were assumed to be more peer-to-peer in nature, like a pool of peers where people cooperate, and they don't really have a service provider they rely on for unilateral exit, for quick off-chain unilateral exits. But if someone is willing to forward that liquidity for them as a business, something that he gets fee revenue for. And that really changes this game, and the whole thing becomes a lot less frightening. What I'm trying to say is you are not as afraid that you are going to get stuck if just one guy goes offline and doesn't come back because he doesn't care. So you have a situation where people that really want to move, that have an urgency, can be helped with this coordinator, this provider, to move off chain, and these structures can really be compacted. So,
well, you mean they would be moving back on chain? Is that am I understanding that right? Because they
all right. So
so that would be they'd be moving on chain rather than off chain. Just to clarify that.
No, that's the point. On chain, you can only move in two ways. You either push for distribution on the predefined path where everyone retains their property rights because it is committed to, or you all cooperate and update to a new state. That is the only two ways that you can move on chain. So on chain, this is a UTXO, this is a tapscript output. Right? So you have a taproot output, and nobody knows that this is a pool necessarily. I mean, they can know, but even if they know it's a pool, they don't know who are in there. They see the total amount. From the behavior, maybe you can figure out that this is a pool, or maybe so it doesn't need to be secret. The point is, it looks like a taproot transaction, and yes, it has most spend pots where you can create output distributions that have been predefined, but that's kind of expensive. So just because someone wants to move and someone is not ready to move, that's kind of expensive to break up this pool. And what you want to do is, if you can avoid it, and if you have a party that is willing to like swap you out, let's say you want to do an on-chain atomic swap, you want to pay someone and you want to give up your virtual UTXO to this coordinator in exchange for executing funding that transaction, right? So let's say you want to do something like that. You can kind of predefine a hook for this. So you can kind of let in your leaf contract, your virtual transaction output contract, unlock contract, you can put there that either 24-hour has to pass from the point that this virtual UTXO becomes a real UTXO because it hit chain, right? So it has been pushed to on chain. Then the other party, that is a single provider that is assumed to be an always online server and a reliable guy in general, he can, if you gave him this deferred authorization, spend this some other way, but otherwise after 24 hours you can spend it with your private key, basically unilaterally. So you have this basic contract. Arc has this basic contract in the virtual UTXOs, and the kind of dark pool has this same contract, and you can do all sorts of very nice and interesting things with it. If you have like a little bit of more scripting capability, then you can agree with the provider, the Arc service provider, or the dark pool coordinator. You can agree to open a non-interactive channel where you can only spend towards him, and he can route your Lightning transactions to anywhere on the Lightning network. So you can basically off-chain open a transaction, a Lightning channel that you can immediately start spending, and there is nothing happening on chain. So on chain you are still seeing the same UTXO. What happens is you give him a transaction, actually, or some secret that gives him an authorization to spend your virtual UTXO if it hits on chain before the 24-hour time up elapses, right? So not sure I'm explaining it sufficiently, but basically he has time lock risk, but he is a professional and he can take it. You do not have time lock risk.
Yeah. So to zoom out again, it seems like coin pools. And Arc and Dark Pool, they're in the same realm, and they both present a really realistic way for Bitcoin to scale, where they are game theoretically pretty sound, where you do have enough mechanisms to keep the whole thing reliable enough for people that can't afford to be online all the time, like everything seems to require. Because this is the magic of Bitcoin, right? Is that it's, running a node is still server-side software and all that, but people actually are just running it on laptops for the first time. you would ever really
Yeah.
see something like that. And you can be off, which means it's very tolerant to people being offline for long periods of time. Like you don't need, you can use Bitcoin almost entirely offline if you want. Obviously, it's not
Yes.
the right way to approach it, but the point is you can. And then Lightning suddenly brings us back to reality and says, no, like bad things can happen. You basically need to be online all the time, or you've got to sacrifice your privacy or whatever to a third party that handles it all for you. So the fact that it seems like coin pools are quite tolerant, actually, to people being able to dip in and out and use them as and when they like. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so the idea behind dark pool is that these would move relatively slow on chain. So they would update infrequently, but they require, like, this is why I was not like, this is the savior of Bitcoin and is going to solve scaling Bitcoin for everyone, because like you have this full interactivity requirement or relatively costly ejection process that you have to execute on chain. And again, like I said, if only a few people have to move and someone can provide the liquidity for them, then that's great, because then they are not stuck, and the whole thing works just fine. And with Arc, what Burak did with Arc is truly genius, because he greatly decreased the interactivity. So basically, Dark Pool is fully interactive for the state updates for new settlements. So everyone has to sign. But like I said, you can actually give up your private key after you spend. So after you actually spend through the coordinator, you can give up your private key to him, and then he can compact this settlement tree to a great degree, because every node of the tree will have these smaller n of n alternative spends where you can cut through the whole thing, and you don't need to. And if everyone exits through the coordinator or the provider, then he basically can unilaterally spend the entire transaction. So you can save a lot of on-chain space with just that minimal provider being there that you have to interact with. That makes the whole thing a lot more viable and a lot more variable cost-wise, I believe, but still not as good as Arc, because Arc, the way Burak figured the whole thing out, only the people that actually want to transact, that want to spend, have to be online and interactive with the service provider, and the others don't need to. And that's a total game changer. I can tell you that is like a huge thing.
Yeah,
however, it has a price.
Yeah, understood. But it seems like we might live in a world where you have that. You have different implementations of coin pools, and Arc would be one of them. And all this is the general wisdom I hear coming through the cracks at the moment, is just we have a whole bunch of scaling ideas, all with their own trade-offs and compromises, and eventually, optimistically, we live in a world where Bitcoiners can choose the level of trade-offs they want to deal with, what's acceptable to them, what isn't, and that's how we scale Bitcoin. It's not, we don't just go Bitcoin, then Lightning, then something above Lightning, etc. Like you need all these, it looks more like, I don't know, I don't have an analogy for it, but so to come back to how we're going to get into this land of coin pools, what exactly, Arc requires CTV or what? How does Arc, how do we get Arc happening?
All right, so Burak perceived that APO has more consensus. So when he first started talking about Arc, by the way, first Arc didn't even have a proper name. He called it TBDXXX. As in to be determined XXX. That's what he called it. He went to present it, and that's what it was called. And the ATLCs and stuff, I had this idea that it should called Arc Lightning with C, not K, like Arc Lightning. That's what it was. It was understood that it will be heavily integrated with the Lightning Network. It will basically be a Lightning wallet that is an alternative to the custodial Lightning wallets, but kind of gives similar user experience, but you have good privacy and offline receive capability, and you have this internal coin join, and it's not custodial. You have a non-trusted party that helps you, and that provides a lot of liquidity. And so I told people that I actually hope that it will be called Arc Lightning with C, and then Burak came up with Arc with K, and we had a laugh about that too. So the point is that Arc has this mechanism by which the provider, the Arc service provider, can very efficiently sweep the transactions after 2 or 4 weeks have passed. Like, this is a parameter, like you said, various parameters and various trade-offs can be chosen for different people in different under different circumstances and with different needs. So design space is flexible, and basically you have this sweep timeout, and everyone needs to swap out to a new arc pool where the timeout starts again to retain their non-custodial status. Or alternatively, if the arc service provider is like benign, so if you assume the arc service provider is benign, then everyone that failed to swap over, he can basically non-interactively swap them over to the same keys. So he can basically construct a new arc pool where they have their VTXOs, and until that is committed and confirmed to the Bitcoin blockchain, they are kind of, for that time period, they are in custody, because the service provider could still change his mind and double spend the transaction and could spend them differently. But if he is benign, then their counter starts again. So that is a possibility. But if they don't want to rely on that, then they would actively swap over. When the timeout comes close, their wallet will tell them that you need to, right? You have 48 hours to swap over. Please do. Now it's free. And basically, that's kind of how it would function. And for that timeout, that swipe timeout part, that makes Arc not as absolute in property rights as an on-chain transaction, on-chain UTXO that you own and only you have the keys for it. It kind of has this time lock where you are forced to do one thing or another before that expires. It is more similar to Lightning, but the non-interactivity that you get with Arc is fantastic. So I have to say that is a very, very good trade-off. And the fact that with a Covenant pool you do not have to have full interactivity, not even every 2 weeks or something like that, that it just works and everyone can come online at their own pace and do their transactions, right? Yeah. And they only have to like minimally coordinate a coin join. Coin join implementations work today, so we know kind of that you can solve that coordination problem. And of course it can fail. Of course denial of service attacks can be attempted, and maybe the Arc service provider would have to try it like 5 times to get everyone to sign to a new state. But still, it only involves people who actually want to transact. It does not even involve, if you have covenants and you have the tools, it does not even involve the people that would receive. And how this happens is basically the sender, knowing the public key of the receiver, can tweak this public key and generate for him these keys for the virtual UTXO, right? So he can basically generate these stealth addresses, or I don't know how to call them, for the recipient, and he can register these in the coin joiner's outputs. So instead of his own outputs, he registers the recipient's outputs that he generated for him, and nobody can actually tell, aside from the sender, who is the recipient, or it was a spend or not a spend. It's impossible to really tell, and you have very good privacy this way, and this awesome offline receive capability, and so it can generally be like a better UX, because you can send money to a pub key, unlike with Lightning today where you can't really. But if the node is offline, then you definitely can't. So maybe people are trying to work around that. I believe they are trying to make these pull invoices where you can give that invoice offline to someone, and when they come online, if your node is also online at the same time, then they can pull, and it is no custodial. Then it's very complicated with Lightning.
Yeah.
With this, it's absolutely not complicated. It's very non-interactive, very good stuff. So I'm very excited about Arc. But like you said, there are trade-offs. So it is not as absolutely self-sovereign as Darkpool. With Darkpool, you do not have timeout risk whatsoever. Like I said, if you get into an accident and get stranded in the middle of the ocean, you cannot lose your coins.
So is there something? Is there the Arc equivalent of a watchtower that would remove the need for this interactivity, and even something that could be interactivity as a service or something? I don't know what you would label this thing, but basically,
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I just call them trade-offs.
Yeah, fair enough. But I mean, it's nice to think there would be a market. Like any of this stuff comes with, like you can pay people to be watchtowers, right? So you can have security as a service, right? And it can be done often in ways where you don't compromise any privacy. So this could be quite interesting to do, it can help mitigate the trade-off, so to speak.
I think it could be possible to have some watchtower functionality for Arc, maybe, because if you can create, so if you let someone know how to push your virtual UTXOs on chain, and then after 24 hours you can give them a pre-signed transaction that spends that to your own wallet and pays them some amount, then they can be incentivized to do that. But you have some risks with all this. In that case, if it does not have a flexible fee schedule, and even if it has, you have some risk with that it will be too expensive than what you had in mind. So when you contracted the watchtower, you offer them like 5,000 Satoshi to get your 1 million Satoshi VTXO to your self-custody, and the on-chain fees in total will be 50,000 Satoshi or something. Then it will not happen, right? So there is this problem with the idea when you have to do so much on-chain operations and with such unpredictability that it might not actually work out so well, but probably is possible.
Yeah, this is my fear with the cost of on-chain fees being so high. Generally, is that a lot of these sort of adversarial scenarios rely on it being semi-plausible or realistic for you to be able to actually do something on chain. Like if you're getting griefed in a Lightning channel and it's a channel with 200,000 sats capacity, and like someone decides to try and steal the whole thing, and like the likelihood of you being able in like a high fee ordinals bullshit environment, right? Lightning worked surprisingly badly when we had people paying 600-700 sats per vbyte. So but Lightning in theory can be built on anything, right? With used on top of anything. So I do imagine we need 3 layers, not 2. And whatever it is you need layer 2, which is just far cheaper than on-chain. It is reasonable for Bitcoin's layer 1 to be, extremely expensive, and we know it's going to be in the future. It's reasonable to expect that. So you have all these layer 2s with that are very sophisticated and way cheaper, and then you build whatever it is, the day-to-day transaction layer, instant and cheap on top of that, and then the fail-safes for that layer 3 fall back to layer 2, which is actually realistic to use again and just requires these periodic periods of interaction where you do need to maintain it a bit, and it's some kind of rotational responsibility that's like part of your monthly cycle. Like, I've got to go and do my monthly interaction with Arc or whatever. I'm not going to be able to do it for 6 months, so I'll pay this service provider to do it for me. Something reminiscent of a kind of watchtower, conceptually. And if the thing above the pool is, if I suffer some sort of issue there, like I've got to force close a channel or something like that, I fall back to Arc, which is actually not so prohibitive and more reliable, and I can do something there to escape the
Yes.
issue. And then if all that fails, then I got to go back to layer one. But that just shouldn't happen very often, right? Like layer one
Yes.
is really just, it's going to be for setting all this stuff up. And ideally, you're doing it a few times in your life at this point. I mean,
Yeah.
if it doesn't look like that, then Bitcoin straight up just doesn't scale. Like that's the
Yeah.
only way you're going to get a billion people using it. If it's literally like all these billions of people, they use Bitcoin's layer one maybe 10 times in their life. More than that if they're super rich. But like that's
Yeah.
basically all the capacity we have, right?
Yeah. You gave a very good overview of what can be described as optimistic layered scaling, like a comprehensive optimistic layered scaling to billions of people. And a lot of the stuff but they seem like very scary at first glance. Like people are saying, what will you do if the fees are high and it's not worth it to enforce on chain your virtual UTXOs, your ownership? What will you do if the ARC service provider just simply denies to swap you over and tries to push this whole thing to the swipe? And the answer to that is that your wallet is going to do it automatically anyhow, and the ARC service provider knows this, and he will commit enough fees because the protocol requires it, because the social contract, this is why people will put money into it, because the ARC service provider will lose a lot of money. Of course, it will cost the people. Like, it cannot be asymmetric. It cannot just cost one side money, because then the other side can grieve. It has to be punitive. It has to be painful for both sides. So that way they are actually incentivized to cooperate, because it's just expensive and bad for everyone not to cooperate. And that is good game theory, right? So that way you only expect that people who are like real assholes and try to screw with others for fun and can afford it to maybe do these things, and or if something goes wrong, like someone is having malfunction, something is not connecting, and something went wrong, then you would see this enforcement. But in every other time, it will be much cheaper for everyone to cooperate, and the tools will cooperate automatically, basically. So it's kinda optimistic, but not unreasonably optimistic. That's what I like to think about all this.
Yeah, me too. And we know the main issue is going to be somewhat to do with education, but also just motivation. So to that end, you need people to use solutions that don't look like this, that are just, people using Moon Wallet, or, actually, well, Moon Wallet's not a good example. I mean, literally people having, like in Canada, we have ShakePay, right? It's an exchange, and you can just send Bitcoin to and from other people using the same exchange by just typing their exchange ID. And of course, no Bitcoin is moving at all. It's just moving around in their internal databases. So that's the nightmare scenario, and it's super likely as well. So the trouble is we have a time limit before all this bad habits become entrenched. So it's a scary thing, and this is, I guess, would you agree that there's a lot of impatience around what we're doing here, while everyone sort of figures out exactly how we're going to proceed, but covenants do seem like the low-hanging fruit for the next step in all of this.
Yes, absolutely agree. And let me tell you, it's extremely frustrating to me, and it's very hard for me to deal with this and to control myself. And people ask the question, what's the rush? This.
Oh, there's a huge rush. I'm glad you agree with that.
The tone they ask this with is like so condescending, and people who actually understand the problem, and they understand the momentum where Bitcoin takes us, and the negative externalities that will come with that if we scale Bitcoin custodially. We will lose everything that is good about Bitcoin. Literally, we are at a point in time where we risk losing everything that is good if we go down that path once more, with banks and financial institutions and custody and state control, basically, and full surveillance and stuff like that. And people don't understand this, and and sometimes I just want to scream when they ask this question, what's the rush? But on the other hand, it is true that if you come across as someone that like really wants something and they don't understand, then it puts them off. So it's a lot better approach to be like jovial about it and say, yeah, we should really do this, but only like if it has consensus, and we should talk about it. And yeah, we should not rush things really, but we also have to build for the future, and these things take a lot of time to actually build, deploy, test, and adopt.
Well,
So we are talking about 5 to 10 years for these things to get actually adopted by people. And if you can deliver this in like more calmly and more in a more collected and logical way, then it is better received, even though you know that the time is not working for us. So
yeah,
that's the sad
but there is
experience.
an inertia to the whole system, and that will get worse. You know, people refer to
Yeah,
this as ossification, but we know Bitcoin can't ossify. We know that everything you just said is completely correct about how bad it becomes if we don't, start to take. If we don't get the scaling we need, we know how bad it becomes. We know that it loses all the quality
yeah,
properties that it has, and we know that Bitcoin, it becomes wide open to 6102s and
yeah.
inflation as well, because
Yes,
I'm already sure there's more than 21 million Bitcoin if you add up all the balances on various Chinese exchanges and
yes.
Coinbase and GBTC. I'm sure if you add all that up and you run, it won't
Yeah.
match what it's supposed to match. I'm sure there's paper Bitcoin out there.
FTX was really highlighting this,
Yeah, right.
as I heard the story.
Yeah, of course. So, I think the process, as frustrating as it is, I think just to compliment and appreciate what you've been doing, the fact that CTV came back around after the initial immune system reaction against it that I was a part of, just because he proposed it with speedy trial, the right thing eventually happened, and it didn't take that much longer than you'd expect.
Yeah.
And now, basically, people like me and a lot of other people that were very against it at the time, just because of how it was presented. I mean, you could even say that was just political opposition. There was no technical merit to it, but actually, I think we were only opposed on a technical level, but specifically to the activation mechanism imposed. Like, it's hard to draw the line
Yeah.
between politics and technicalities here, but the point is, thanks to people like yourself and a few others who have been very vocally supportive of CTV and willing to educate and sit down and assuage people's concerns and also speak to the benefits of it, it's moving in the right direction. And covenants, like you agreed already, are such a good low-hanging fruit for what they enable scaling-wise that it doesn't seem far away now. I think realistically
Yeah.
by 2025 we can have CTV. I don't know if it would be combined with another soft fork. In theory, we can activate multiple soft forks at once because of, we've got all these
Yeah.
version bits, but I sincerely doubt we'll ever do something like that. I doubt it. So,
Yeah, it's much more likely it will be like a bulk activation effort. It's much more likely that it will be like one activation effort for maybe multiple proposals, or maybe a proposal that has multiple components. Uh, we could talk a tiny little bit about, if you want, on some technical interesting differences between APO and CTV. Maybe if you feel like after it. Not sure how much time you have.
yeah, I'm running out of time as we speak. But I would, I think it's definitely worth doing. So, yeah, give me what you got on the differences between
All right.
CTV and APO, and after that, I'm probably going to have to end it. So, yeah.
All right. So the interesting thing, and this is very much related to ARC, is Burak proposed this Anchor time lock contract, which basically is really a genius idea that is using a transaction that can only come into existence if a certain other transaction that is the parent of it is not double spent. So basically, its existence depends on the finality of its parent. And this parent is basically the next ARC pool transaction that is not committed yet, that only exists, only presented to users that want to, sign their ATLCs. And by taking this connector output, this connector transaction output in as an input for their Anchor time lock transaction, they basically guarantee that their signature is only valid. It can only be enforced on chain if that output exists. That is in the either like in the mempool or already committed to the Bitcoin blockchain. And that kind of means that this signing over of the virtual UTXO from an earlier pool is atomic with you getting your change in the later pool, in the new pool that is still in the mempool, right? Maybe there are 50 other ARC pool transactions before it can hit on-chain and confirmation, but you actually know that you gave up your virtual UTXO ownership to the ARC service provider under the condition that is going to hit Bitcoin blockchain exactly with that transaction ID and with that output distribution possible that you all agreed on. So basically it gives you, like, almost under certain circumstances, you can think of it as a functional zero conf, right? So you immediately know that you have atomicity, because you either get your change, or you either get what you want, or you simply not going to give up your virtual UTX, so you will not sign it over, and you can still enforce it on chain after 24 hours have passed. And that is such a genius idea. Like, it really solves this whole interactivity problem, and it really solves a lot of issues, a lot of user experience issues. Waiting for confirmation is no longer a thing. So Burak is really a genius Bitcoin wizard and Covenant wizard, and he's a great dude. And the important thing about all this, what I'm trying to get to, is sometimes you need to be able to reason about, you need to be able to prove and see what the transaction ID of certain transactions will be. When you have a chain of transactions, you want to generate this chain non-interactively, because it's time critical, and it's also just simpler for everyone to verify and to build this up. And you want to show people that these transaction IDs have to follow each other. If you go on the non-cooperative path, or in our case, you go on the non-sweep path. So if you are within the sweep timeout, this is the only way that this can go to on-chain, and it will have this transaction ID. And then you can take it as an input, and you can sign your transaction with as an input, and you can be sure that the ARC service provider is committed to giving you your virtual UTX in the next pool, or your change, or whatever. So that is the reason why CTV is actually capable of providing us with ARC, and APO is not really, because APO does not commit to the number of inputs and does not commit to a few fields that CTV does, because Jeremy has spent years. Sorry.
No, I was just saying interesting.
Yeah, so Jeremy spent a lot of time in trying to find, like I said, the minimum set of pieces of a transaction that you have to commit to enable certain advanced smart contract functionality, like these anchor time lock constructions that are the soul and heart of ARC. And you can use CTV in two ways. You can say that it is going to have one input, and in this case, you can predict the transaction IDs. The subsequent transaction IDs are becoming predictable in case CTV is used with one input. But if you say this can have two inputs, then you can have a flexible fee schedule, and you can add your own input as needed, and that input has to go to the fees, because your outputs are predefined and set. And in that mode of CTV, it works more like an APO AS contract, so APO and APO any script, any private any script contract, because that does not define the number of inputs really. It only commits to the output distribution, and you can add your own inputs, but this makes it more malleable, makes the transaction ID not predictable, and this poses a problem for Arc, because if you try to use APO, then someone can steal from the other. If you add the single sig, or you do or this or that, then it changes that who can grieve the other and who can steal from the other. But the end result is that APO just doesn't work for Arc.
Yeah, so if I understand, I'm going to take a guess at summarizing what you just said, and if I get it wrong, feel free to laugh at me. So, the fact that the hash doesn't include the inputs, or that the inputs can be anything in APO, means that once it's published, once a transaction is published, people can change the inputs without affecting the hash, because so this means that this opens it up to flexibility that is not helpful. You need to limit that. So does CTV offer you the ability to, you can predefine how many inputs there will be, but you don't have to predefine an input. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct, because that would be kind of like a hash cycle thing, where you have to like the inputs, if you committed to your inputs, they would depend on the transaction ID, and the log script would depend on the template hash. So you get a hash cycle, and it's not really solvable in the time period that we got to spend in this galaxy before it collides with another galaxy. So kind of like I don't want to say an impossible problem, because someone can get lucky, but it's not a practical problem to try to solve. Like it's really hard to solve these hash cycle problems, and that is the main reason why Bitcoin can't have practical covenants today, because you could put a signature into a log script, not into a parameter, right? You could put it into the witness script, and then that signature would be binding for the next transaction. But then you would need to know your transaction ID, and that transaction ID depends on this this commitment. So it's kind of impossible to calculate these things, and so anyhow, what I wanted to really highlight is that such a tiny difference, that APO does not commit to the number of inputs, and CTV has been very carefully designed for years, and it actually works in both modes, because like I said, you can use it with flexible fee schedule. You can have 10 alternative CTV pods with different input counts. TypeScript allows us to have like multiple variants of it, so you can almost do everything that you can do with APO, but of course not exactly. And the point is, neither can exactly emulate the other, and nobody thought that was important before Arc, because Arc really highlights an extreme high value use case where these minute differences are really becoming important. And I believe this helped people to have more interest in covenant research, and realize that these things, we thought we understood them, but maybe nobody really understood these differences and what they mean, and what we actually want from them, because before Arc nobody thought that this was such an important thing. Especially, the APO camp did not thought that this was an important
for sure.
consideration.
The use cases are definitely going to define the way these covenant proposals eventually end up looking, and it's a good point, because I did mention that it was you and other people championing CTV that brought it back around after Jeremy sort of walked away. But actually, Arc suddenly coming around off the back of Burak's fame from having broken LND twice for fun. That was suddenly what made a lot of people suddenly go, "Oh, now I get it. Now I really want CTV."
Yeah, and then we are also trying to mend like the differences, because a lot of people have like ideological affiliation to certain certain bips. And
well, that's silly. Like, and to be fair, like to give credit where it's due, I haven't really seen much of that. The people I know that are in the Bitcoin community that I am listening to, they're fairly happy to switch, and I'm very impressed with how little people are sort of letting egos and tribalism get in the way. And you're a good example of that. I saw you go, oh wait, TX hash plus check sig from stash is maybe preferable to CTV,
yes,
and everyone basically went, oh, great idea. Like, I didn't really see much tribalism there at all. So I still
what I meant is some people said stuff like that they would neck every covenant proposal if it does not give them LN symmetry and stuff like that, right? So, and we discussed why that is not a very wise position to maintain, because LN symmetry is useful and desirable, but it does not change anything about Bitcoin scalability issues and does not really change anything in the user experience for Lightning users, and does not change anything really on this whole mess that we are heading towards with full tilt, right? So there are people who were like that, but I hope that they will also get excited by these new potentials, and they develop a more open mind, and they appreciate the work of people like Reardon Code, who really applied himself to try to work on top of the existing work, instead of throwing it away, like swiping it off the table. He actually did try to really dig into it, really distill it, and really optimize it, in my view. And that is why he does not take his proposal as seriously as I would like, because I think it is a very, very good proposal, and possibly superior to activating CTV with APO. So that's the funny thing about it, that I think TX hash plus CSFS is actually superior to activating both APO and check template verify. It just makes sense on a technical and engineering level. It's such a beautiful thing. And the one final thing I would like to say about all this, if you have the time,
go for it.
So there is a new mode proposed, because when Reardon Code started, he actually wanted to start with really just the functionality that is well understood. Like I said, without the weirdness in APO, he tries to not include that unless absolutely necessary. So we are trying to take the good stuff from APO and the good stuff from CTV and like really unleash it in the most useful ways and the most efficient ways that we can. And that is like a very good approach to this, I believe. Of course, it is a problem that we have big proposals that have been around for years and they are still not getting the green light, and we are kind of making sure that if we get behind a new proposal, that we delay the activation even further. But sometimes it just makes sense. Sometimes it makes technical engineering sense. So I'm not opposed to that, if that is going to be the consensus. And the new mode that is proposed was actually coming from Burak, because Burak said that he is really interested in TX hash plus CSFS because he kind of finds CTV limited, but he did not say anything. And for months, I was frustrated because I really wanted to understand where he's coming from. In my mind, ARC worked perfectly with CTV. Of course, it has some limitations, and it turned out that Burak actually wanted to get like the best of both worlds. When I said CTV works with either, with predictable transaction IDs, or which make the ATLC possible, or with flexible fee schedule. It can only work in one of the two modes, right? Burak actually figured out a way, Burak and Reardon Code figured out a set of transaction parts that can be hashed, that makes it possible to commit to the connector transaction output in a way that is desirable and still retain a flexible fee schedule in your Covenant distribution tree. So you basically out of nowhere, someone said, if you do this, you actually get even more the best of both worlds, right? So you get something that is even better and more useful primitive, especially for org, but I'm pretty sure people will find it useful more generally. And if we activate one of these proposals, then thousands of developers are going to start looking at them and figuring out ways that they can use them. And that was an interesting fallout. Of course, there is some discussion about, so Jeremy Rubin avoided more flexible ways to commit to transactions for a very good reason. Because he was worried about quadratic hashing, he was worried about performance and denial of service attacks. And not every ways can be conveniently, efficiently, and safely cached. So, you know, the way the SIG hash flags are used to construct the transaction hash is heavily cached in the implementation, in the Bitcoin Core implementation, so that if someone is trolling people with a lot of SIGOPS or whatever, that it jams into a large transaction, then it won't cause the nodes to verify this for many minutes. And the issue with Bitcoin Core, if I remember correctly, is that it uses a custom implementation of SHA-256, and that is a hell of a lot slower than the CPU optimized implementations that most cryptographic libraries use. Like Bitcoin Core has its own implementation. Mm-hmm. I think it was written by Eric Voskuli. I'm not sure. I heard something like that. And so basically, it's plausible that even with CPU optimized instructions, it's going to take unreasonably long to verify a block if someone can tap into this quadratic hashing attack. So it's a very bad thing. And if you allow people to like iterate through I don't know how to say this properly, but if you allow them to keep instructing the Bitcoin VM to keep hashing the same large transaction again and again, because you are giving so much freedom in the flags that it becomes practically impossible to hash it properly. Like specifically, if you say that hash all the inputs except this one input, that is not really well cacheable, because for the next input it will not be valid. That hash will not be valid, and stuff like that. If you understand, if I say it this way, that the way CTV has been constructed, it's very easy to reason about and very easy to cache efficiently, because it is compatible with the existing SIG hash operations and caching. And basically, once a CTV template has been constructed, it will be cached. And if you call CTV like a million times, then it's just going to return the same hash. It's not going to hash your transaction a million times.
Yeah.
And that basically guarantees that you cannot have like weird unintended bad outcomes. But if you give people too much freedom in how they can play with like OptX and OptX hash, the original proposals wanted to allow like weird combinations of these that can be, you know, permuted through like with some incrementation or whatever. You could like take these binary flags in combinations and you could not efficiently cache some of them, then it would be possible to run denial of service attacks on all Bitcoin nodes that try to validate the transaction.
Yeah.
And CTV really tries to avoid that, and it probably avoids that. And with new proposals, you always have to start from scratch. Like you have to examine what exactly is getting hashed, what problems that can that present if someone wants to troll with it, right? Mm-hmm. So you are back to square one. You have to prove safety to the developer community, to the technical community. You have to demonstrate safety. You have to show them the upper bounds of computation that have to be performed. That worst case, if someone is really trying to screw over everyone, and that is why Reardon was hesitant to really push this idea, and it helps Arc tremendously. And I believe if we limit it in some reasonable sense, be limited to what we actually want to accomplish, and not allow these trollish weird cases, then I believe it could be included into this proposal, and that would really help ARC to be like better, simpler, more robust, more reliable, and that's a very interesting fallout from this new proposal, that even just trying to combine two previously well understood covenant proposals can like make everything potentially a lot better and more powerful even than they were even on their own or combined, right? So that is the interesting insight for me. I'm a bit rambling.
No, that's fine. I really appreciate that insight. I did manage to follow most of that towards the end. And I think this is a good place to wrap up. So, while personally I probably understood optimistically 20 or 30% of what you were going into throughout this whole conversation, I think it's going to be incredibly helpful for a lot of people. So I'm not hesitant at all to put this out there, and hopefully some people can get some benefit from it. This stuff is really not easy. It's extremely complicated to get to the bottom of it, but it's essential because we're not going to move anything forward otherwise, and things do need to move forward. So thanks so much, man, for coming on. I really appreciate you jumping on and explaining all this. You have an absolutely excellent depth of understanding of all this stuff, and I really appreciate it. I think everyone that listens to it is going to appreciate it. And as maybe I'll be able to come back and ask some more questions another time, because I'm personally just going to listen back through this a bunch and start to understand where, start to break down some of the stuff where it's just going a little bit too fast for me. It's a complicated bunch of stuff, but it's really helpful. I don't know where else we can get this info, to be honest. I mean, outside of like reading through long GitHub issues and stuff like that, or just reading on pull requests and all that stuff and digging into Bitcoin's code itself, it's really hard to get this stuff. So,
yes.
Thank you.
If you have follow-up questions or you find some parts like hard to understand, I think we should do like a follow-up on this. And if we could like recruit Rearden code into this, like we could do the three of us one that might actually be even more helpful, because I have noticed that he is actually better at explaining this stuff. And
fantastic.
And overall,
we recently connected. Me and Rearden followed each other, so I'm sure I can shoot him a message. That's a great idea. So maybe over the next couple of weeks, once I've really digested all this, because I want to be able to host this stuff and participate on a level where I actually am asking relevant questions, right? Because I'm so out of my depth that I'm barely able to bridge the gap.
I think you absolutely have the right intuitions, and you asked perfectly fine questions, and I think there are no problems. Like you said, someone that does not spend months or years on Covenant research, it is just too much. Like if you dump this on people, it's perfectly normal. That I think you have a very good understanding.
I appreciate that. I think I've really got to wrap up now, so I'll make one last point, which is what you've got to overcome with people is the fear of unintended consequences. So you've got to go a long way in explaining potential attack vectors that open up as a result of these things, which is what you were doing at the end there, talking about this griefing attack where you can create templates that there's no caching possible, so you're just burning CPU cycles and people are just having fun with it.
Imagine if validating a block would take like an hour for a high-end PC.
This is completely
and the pipe would never complete it, right?
This absolutely breaks everything. Like that's obvious. That's quite an obvious attack, right? Like that's something that if we didn't mitigate against and something was making it to like activation phase or even merging the logic of the soft fork itself, that would imply that we had a major issue in our process. But there are more subtle bugs, and sometimes we catch the subtle bugs and miss the big things. That's what a lot of people thought happened with Taproot. It didn't really, and there are people that went, I was criticizing Taproot wrongly. inscriptions and ordinals were possible anyway. But this is basically going to be people's concern, because everyone's going to say, okay, I get it. I like ARC. I like, LN symmetry or whatever is enabled. I like splicing. I like all this stuff, but I need to make sure there are no unintended consequences, because I've got thousands or millions or billions of dollars in Bitcoin now, and it works, and I'm too short-sighted to understand that it will break in the future without any of these upgrades. So you need to meet an overwhelming burden of demonstration that this thing is both warranted and won't break anything. And this is not easy to do, but it can be done. And basically, it's conversations like this that's going to make it happen. So, yeah, thank you again. I definitely have to jump off now. I really appreciate this.
Thank you.
I'm gonna try and edit the thing and get it out later today, and hopefully we can keep the conversation going. Thanks so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate talking to you.
Have a nice day.